Oops. Hi everyone, Zarina here, and welcome to the channel and to another woolly episode. So today we are casting on for the rainbow mitts, and I've got a really nice kind of stripy rainbow yarn here, and I did talk about it in the last episode. It's the Yarn Fair Flying Colours yarn. I got it on sort of a spree to the beach and there's a little knitting shop there which I visited, and I do like to buy souvenir yarn, and this was one of those. So I really do want to knit it up into something. I did already knit it into something. I talked about it on the previous episode where I was talking about materials. So that's what we're going to do today. So today we're casting on, but I just wanted to share a couple more materials with you that you could possibly use. You can use a 4-ply, but you would have to really bulk it up, and you would have to, because this is kind of a super bulky. So if you can get your hands on a super bulky, that's great, which is like an 8 or 10 ply, I would say. But if you can't, then, you know, putting some strands together, different colors even, would make it interesting, I think, you know, and unique. And I'm always for, you know, doing something that's unique, to be honest with you. So this is more my thing, where I put things together. Yeah, that would be very bluey tones. So that's a Drops Fable, and I think that's a King Cole. You put something like that together, or you could mix it with a DK. So those were 4-ply, and that's a DK. So you're trying to make something quite, you know, thick. And I was talking about 2 strands last time in the last video, but I'm thinking maybe you're going to need 3 or even 4 of the DK. So that just goes to show how thick this is, you know. Other yarns you can use are kind of like some really rusticy wool ones, and I've got this it's the Armscote Manor yarn, which is a British brand, and it's kind of local to me actually, and they've just got like a small amount of sheep which they keep. Yeah, so you know, you could use something like that. And then this is a sort of a, I think this is a chunky, but you would need to mix it with a couple more strands, so you need at least 3 or maybe 4 even. Now if you want to use 2 strands of anything, or even with the super bulky, and you feel, you know, it's too tight or whatever, it's too small, then just, you know, go up a few needle sizes. So we're using the 4.5mm needle to cast on. And I think in the last episode I said I'd probably knit the whole mitt with the 4.5, but I'm not going to. I'm going to just cast on and knit the rib with the 4.5s, and then I'm going to be knitting the body of the knitting with the 5mm needle. So this is a 4.5, and that would be a 5mm needle. So yeah, what you could do is, I mean, because they recommend, what do they recommend? They recommend an 8 or a 9mm needle, and I think that's really too big for mitts. And I did talk about this because I think they're a little bit holy. Then you want them kind of a little bit tighter to keep the air out, you know. Right, anyway, let's get on. I've waffled enough, and we're already 3 minutes in. Dearie me. So, you know, it's just going to be a basic cast on, and I'm kind of gearing this cast on towards the beginner, really, I suppose. Now, if you're an old hat at knitting and you have a cast on you prefer, just use that. So what I'm going to do first is, now have I talked about everything about the yarn, about the needles? I think I have. I might mention things further down if I've forgotten something. Okay, so what you do is just make a normal knot, and it's not a slip knot or anything, it's just normal. And then hold your knitting with, this is how I like to do it. I like to hold my knitting with one hand, and then I pop, this is the active hand and this is the active needle, and I'm kind of doing it with a right-handed aspect. Yeah, so we're just doing right-handed stuff at the moment, just to let you know, heads up. Okay, pop your needle in, angle it to the back, so the active needle should be angled to the back. And I do have a tutorial somewhere on how to cast on, so take your yarn round, pull it out, pop it on. That's pretty much what you're going to do for the remainder of the stitches, and I'm casting on for the medium size, which is 24 stitches. And there is a pattern available which you can look in the description and find a link. So yeah, so there is a pattern in there. Right, so there we go. So that's what we do. We're just casting on 24 stitches, and then when we've done that, we're going to join it up in the round, which, you know, could be tricky because we're using circular needles. That's probably why I didn't mention in the beginning. If you're knitting this flat, right, I suspect you can still knit this even if you're knitting it flat. But that would be a different episode, perhaps, unless you can work it out how you can knit it flat. You know, yeah. And what I have to do now with circular needles, I have to angle these stitches on 2 needles. So I'm going to do that. I usually like to knit an extra stitch, which I then knit with the beginning stitch to kind of hold it a little bit fast. So that extra stitch is going to be knit up with the first stitch, which is this one. So the first thing I'll do is just going to angle the knitting over the 2 needles like so. And if you've watched any of my previous videos, I kind of do this at the beginning. I always start with the cast on, with all the bits of the cast on, how to do it, etc. So apologies if you kind of know how to do it. The pattern is in the description though, so you know, but it is a basic easy mitten. And I've just taken that stitch that the extra one I knit, and I've put it on to the tail end needle. Right, now I pull that one out, and I usually, as you can see, I usually like to hold my knitting like this, and I've also made sure that it's sort of angled in one direction, which isn't too hard with a mitten because it's small. It's a little bit more difficult with a, well, I wouldn't say difficult, but it's a little bit more work with like a hat or something like that. Right, so that last stitch I've made has gone onto the needle, and I'm going to knit it up with the first stitch that I cast on. So I'm going to go through that first stitch and that last stitch, angle that right hand needle to the back, and then I'm going to take that round and then knit it off like so. There. And that's literally the knit stitch. And then the next one, which is a purl stitch, we to take our yarn round to the front, and then instead of going in this way round, we're going in this way. So going kind of parallel. Well, maybe that's parallel. The opposite then of parallel. But we're going in from the front, right? There you go. And then you just take your yarn round like that. Pull it out and take it off. Right, and now we're going to do the knit stitch again. So this is a 1x1 rib. And it pretty, once you know how to do it, I mean, if you're not a fan of pearls, ribs do have pearls, you don't have to do a ribbed cuff if you don't want to. But the thing with that is a rib does actually pull in the cuff and it tightens it up. Uh-oh, sirens. Right, we're in the city, so apologies for any noise. Yeah, so we're just carrying on until we get, well, until we get to the end of the row basically, and then we're going to knit another 9 rows in a rib. You know, so that's where we are. And you know, to knit the other side, you just pull your needle in like so, and then you pull this needle out. And sometimes with these interchangeables, which is what they are, they might unscrew a bit, so you need to screw them back in and maybe tighten them. So I usually pop a pin here and then just get my pin. You can pop a pin in here like so, and then yeah, and then really tighten them like that. Okay. Righty-ho. So this last stitch was a knit stitch, so the next one's going to be a purl, so the yarn's got to be forward like so. Yeah, I'm just going to carry on and do this. And it's a good idea to count your stitches as well when you finish knitting the first row, just in case you've dropped one or you didn't knit enough in the first place and you didn't count them properly. Things happen, you know, especially if you're like busy or you're doing something else at the same time, like watching telly or something, or there's people talking at you. You know, sometimes you forget your stitches, or you drop something, I don't know. Sometimes it happens, so it's best to count them just to make sure you've got the right amount, because what you don't want is a cuff that's too tight, is what I would say. So I turn the knitting and then I'll just pull that one in like so, and try and keep it kind of tidy and neat so that I don't get too confused about what I'm doing with it. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22 and 24. Yeah, and that's the correct amount of stitches. 24 stitches is what I needed. So then I'm going to, so this is the tail end, and this is now the working needle, and I know that because the yarn is attached to this needle. Pull that out. And just begin knitting again. And I would say when you cast on loosely, because what you don't want is this bit to be tight, because the thing is, this is going to be kind of loose and just pull in, because that's the way rib is. But this cast on edge, if it's too tight, then you'll find actually getting it through that hole, getting your hand through that hole, is what's going to be a problem. So make sure you keep the cast on nice and loose. And if you feel it's casting on too tight and you've knit a bit and you think, oh, actually I'm not going to get my hand in that hole, then cast on with a bigger needle. That's another tip. You know, you don't have to cast on with the smaller needle, cast on with the bigger needle. So for instance, if the body of the knitting is going to be 5, you're going to use a 5mm, then cast on with the 5mm, then change when you get to, you know, when you get to actually do the rib, change your needle to the smaller one. So the rib will still pull in nicely, but you'll be able to get your hand in easily. So that's one tip. That's kind of like a tip, that is. It is a tip. It's not kind of like one. It is one. Okay. What I like about these variegated yarns or stripy yarns is the change of color. I mean, I absolutely love this pink color anyway. It's the best. And then you've got all these other ones. So when I get to one of these, it's going to be pretty exciting, you know. Yeah. But I'm not doing, in this instance, a helical knit or anything like that. I'm just, it's going to be a little simple glove, really. And the reason for that is that, you know, sometimes you want to do some gift knitting and give people gifts for either, you know, seasonal gifts or birthday gifts. And if you get bogged down with patterns and working out stuff too much or following something complicated, it takes longer and sometimes you miss the deadline. So you need to give yourself enough time to knit something a little bit more complicated. And the other thing about gift knitting is that, you know, knitting takes time. So you don't really want to be knitting stuff you think won't necessarily be received the way you want it to be. You might be knitting something up for someone as a present, and people don't, you know, people who don't knit maybe don't know how long things take, or, you know, what's involved. So knitting something simple is probably better than knitting something too complicated, unless you know that person is definitely going to be wearing it and they're definitely going to be, I don't know, knit worthy is a word that comes to mind. Yeah. So yeah, anyway, that's how I think. I think if someone I know is a real person who's gonna, well, everyone's a real person. If someone is going to wear what I've knit them, and I'm sure of it, yeah, they'll get something more complicated. If someone else I'm knitting for, I'm not sure of, I'm not sure if they're going to actually even wear it more than once, then I might knit something a little bit more plainer for them. I mean, it's not that it will be any less of anything, but it will be, you know, slightly less work, so that I don't have to sort of be upset later that, oh, I knit that thing and I've never seen them wear it, and that took me like a year to make. Yeah, that sort of thing. And you know, if you're a knitter out there, if you're a knitter watching this, a long in tooth knitter even, you know what I mean. I was watching one of my YouTubers a while back, actually, it's quite a long time ago, and she was saying that she knit something for her boyfriend, and then they broke up. And of course she never saw that again, and that was quite upsetting for her. So, you know, be wary. But don't stop knitting things for people. It's such a nice thing to do. The other thing is charity knitting. If you're doing charity knitting, you might not want to make it too complicated either. You might want to make it kind of easy for yourself so that you get a lot knit up, because obviously charity knitting, you know, if it's for babies or whatever, prenatal, or even if it's for charity shops where things are going to sell, you know, you want some volume as well. And if it's volume you're after, then it has to be a bit plainer and a bit simpler, doesn't it, really? Right, anyway, so that's my rib I'm knitting up. That's where I am so far. And I'm going to knit 10 rows. Right, so the rib is done, and it's not tight, it's nice and loose, and our cast on is loose enough to get our hand in. And often what will happen is with cast ons, if you cast on too tight, then it kind of ruins the knitting, because that bottom edge is always too tight. So a loose cast on, I feel, is always a good idea. So now we're going to change our needles. So we've got the 4.5mm needles on still, and they're Knit Pro Symphony ones, and I don't know if I even mentioned that in the beginning of the video. But we're going to use our, again, Knit Pro Symphonies, but they're the 5mm. I really like this brand of needle, actually, because they're really smooth, they're really nice. The only problem with them is if you sit on them, they break. Now at this point, if you feel like this is all a bit too tight and this hasn't worked, then you might want to cast on with a 5 and then go up to a 5.5 or even a 6. So if you find that this has come out too tight and you're not happy with that, you know, that's just too tight for you, you could go up a size. So if this is the medium, well, it is the medium. So if you started with the medium, you find it's too tight, then go up to the large size and see how that goes. If that doesn't work, then continue in the large size, but then change the needles around. So instead of casting on with a 4.5, you could cast on with maybe a 5, or you could cast on with a 5.5. And then, I mean, depending on how tight your gauge is, really. And if you cast on with a 5, then you can go up to a 5.5, or you could go up like a whole size to a 6. So instead of going up in quarters, which is what you normally do, you go up 0.25, you can go like up a whole needle size number. So, you know, try things out and experiment, because part of it is just experimenting and finding out what works. Yeah. That's my advice anyway, that's what I do. Yeah, and you know, the process is fun, so don't be scared of like, oh no, I have to knit this again, or I have to do this, or I have to do that, you know. Best thing to do is, this is why tension swatches are such a good idea. Do a little tension swatch, 10 by 10 centimeters or something, or 10 by 10 stitches, just to see, you know, just to give you an idea. Anyway, signing off for now, and I'll see you in the next episode when we'll be doing the thumb.